step forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Then and Now podcast. I am one of your regular co-hosts, Captain Diesel C. Diesel. To the left of me, I have Lelouch V, OG Big Blurred. And to the right of me, I have Professor E, King of the Comics, Ethan Murphy. How y'all doing, my brothers?
I'm quitting the show.
It's here to
it
stay.
It was fun until this introduction started. Now I'm just like, you know what? I've had a good time. You know, we've had our fun.
If I'm not anything, I'm a man of my word. I told you that name was here to stay. That name is here to stay. Professor E, how you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Enjoying some downtime. Just ready to go, man. A lot of fun to talk about. How you doing, my friend? I know you were battling a couple of viruses and illnesses.
Oh shit!
Oh, we gotta get that straight.
We good, I think. Okay, I
think
like,
Oda
Mike fast and like it was a
Oda said a couple of 20 forks.
We're good. I'm good, man. I was a little under the weather, but I am back to like at least 90% now. Good enough to do the show, so I'm here. Yeah, everyone, to get right into it, we wanted to do this show over the discussion of live action adaptations and the need for them or the lack of. Obviously, this is more so sparked by a lot of the conversation going on around the One Piece live action adaptation that's recently come out on Netflix's platform. First and foremost, let's go ahead and have a little bit of a dialogue on our thoughts on the series in general. And because I feel like Otis probably watched or read more of the series, I'll start with you.
You know what I mean? I'm completely current on the anime. Manga I was current on for a while. I think I got bored of reading it. It's not a fun read. At least for me. But I mean, I don't think that this show actually needed a live action adaptation. It didn't hurt it because I mean, clearly it's the most popular thing on television right now, or on the internet right now. Clearly, the highest rated thing that's come from live action. So I mean, I can't necessarily say it's a detriment to the brand. But it definitely it wasn't the highest quality. I'll just leave it there. I'll leave it there for now.
What up, Danny? Appreciate you for tuning in. We love seeing new faces here, especially on YouTube. Ethan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm more positive on the series. I enjoy watching it. I do think it's funny because it was made by the same studio as the Tomorrow Studios, the same exact studio that made Cowboy Bebop, which I was not a fan of. And no one was,
except for psychos out there,
right? Except for psychos. But this thing, like I heard, like I saw, like so some of the things that Netflix itself was revealing about how this is actually getting more eyes on it than Wednesday and then Stranger Things. So it's like this, regardless if we have hate on it or not, this thing was making some serious numbers. I don't know if everyone was love watching it or hate watching it. Regardless, it was making some waves, and it was a fun watch. We're talking about adaptations. When it comes to anime or even live action with video games, there are a lot of misses. This may not have been perfect by any means, but it was definitely trying to be more in the spirit of the right thing. So
this is the equivalent of like if you're throwing darts at a dartboard, like if you get someone stuck in that last ring, just right there. That's what this was. This wasn't a miss. But
it wasn't a miss.
It wasn't a bullseye.
Yeah, it wasn't a miss, but it may not have been the best thing. But again, I think I'll stop because it's a long intro, but it's just like you have to appreciate what they were trying to do in the medium they're trying to do it. One Piece, a manga that never necessarily needed an anime, was trying to be into a live action, which was never really the medium for it to begin with either. So it's a lot of things you're trying to translate, and things are going to get lost in translation.
Yeah. For me, I kind of share a lot of similar sentiments as my brothers here. I feel like I'm coming in with a relatively unbiased thought process on it because one, I'm drastically behind on the series itself. I think I'm only like 169 episodes in of the anime itself. And I've yet to read any of the manga. So I know like a lot of the different bigger moments because those have been like meme to death, and a lot of content creators have like made TikToks or shorts around those moments. So I have an idea of the show and what it is. but for whatever reason, I don't know. I'll talk to you guys about this in our group chat, but I don't know what it is with these, specifically the Netflix adaptations, where they have this look of amateurism about them.
Mm-hmm.
Like usually for me, the biggest part is the costume design. And I talked about this where it's like trying to recreate super flamboyant hairstyles.
Your audio got a little muffled somewhere.
Test. Am I good? Am I good there?
You sound good. You sound good.
Okay. But trying to recreate like the overly flamboyant hairstyles that you see in certain anime, it's you're not able to do that and it look good. Like if they like when they tried to do like Goku's hair in Dragon Ball Evolution, and all they did was like spike his shit up with some gel, and I'm like, that just looks goofy. You could have just did a regular hairstyle, and it would have been fine. It like because you see it in like in superhero adaptations, right? Where they'll modernize Cap's outfit, or they'll modernize like Black Widow's fit to where it looks somewhat memorable to the source material, but it's also going to look realistic and not look gaudy when we do it. I'm seeing a lot of stuff here to where some of the costume design or some of the makeup for like Arlong looked relatively decent. Like it looked as good I feel like you could get, but Arlong maybe you could get better with it. I'm not a special effects makeup guru, so I didn't have a massive issues with that. But some of the other characters just looked a little bit off to me. And I see that consistently when it comes to this, the Bleach one as well, the Full Metal Alchemist one.
Garbage.
It's just they like I've seen cosplays in real life that look better than these, and these are usually made by one individual, maybe like a group of people working on this thing. So how are these literal amateurs when it? Well, I'm not gonna call them amateurs. I don't know how long they've been doing it for, but in regards to film, possibly these people that aren't getting paid as much to do this thing and just doing it in their free time make something that is more visually appealing, at least to me, than these major budget projects. It is I don't understand it.
Because the people, they put money into the set design. They didn't go to the costume design. Like they ran out of the budget there. That happened. I mean,
I think it's a little more complicated than that because the budget. I'm sure you guys heard about this. There's 8 episodes, right? And the episodes cost roughly $18 million a piece to make, which is more. Which is more than Game of Thrones per episode. Okay, and if you look at Game of Thrones compared to this, you would say, "Oh my gosh, Game of Thrones clearly has a much bigger budget." No, this actually had a bigger budget per episode, and so it's not that they couldn't afford the outfits to look a certain way; it's that they're trying to make them look as similar to the way they look in the anime and the manga. Those outfits don't look complicated or complex at all in the anime and the manga. So they're trying to, in a sense, adhere to the animated and manga illustrations, essentially. And by doing that, it comes across looking more like a stage play. So it's kind of where do you draw the line? Should you go hardcore, make it look as realistic as possible and possibly alienate the hardcore fans and say, hey, that looks too real? Or do you make it look more akin to the actual designs from the manga and the anime and have people say, wait a minute, that looks more like a stage play? It's a weird, which way do you go?
You definitely go towards the modernized. The fans will be okay.
Because in my opinion, when you're doing an adaptation, for me, I'm not a big fan of just retelling the same story. Like I'd rather you like pretty much make a fan fiction. Like do a version of that story, make it different. That way, new fans and old fans can still have some form of like tension and excitement. Because for me, if I watch like a Dragon Ball adaptation that was actually good, it could be as amazing as it possibly could be. But because I've seen the story and know the story beat by beat, I'm going to enjoy watching it, but I feel like I'm not going to get as much joy as I would watching something that I had no idea what was going to happen. And I can speculate, I can have ideas of what's going to happen, but do something different. And I think just like some adaptations to me lack a sense of creativity and innovation that I feel like you need in something like this. Personally, because I'm looking at something like Dragon Ball Heroes, right? Where they're using the Dragon Ball IP and they're using very similar stuff, but it's something new. Like my cousin, he introduced me into blurreddom a little bit. I told you about him before. He's a little bit older, but he's really out of touch with stuff. He's still very much so handcuffed to the stereotypical anime stuff. Like he watches Dragon Ball, Pokemon with his kids. He didn't really get double into too much stuff outside of that, and like maybe like Yu-Gi-Oh. And he loves Dragon Ball Heroes because he's getting new content with something that's familiar to him, and something that I, as somebody that's watched a lot of the stuff, can enjoy, and somebody who's a casual like him that he doesn't really have a lot of knowledge of the verse, he can still enjoy that as well. And you're not just beat by beat ripping off what's already been done and what you can argue is his best form.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm saying like that. There is a dance with that though, because I mean, once you get so far from the original source, you do risk the like pissing off the fans. They be like, "Oh, this isn't the show that I've been accustomed to.
Right.
What is this?" You just kind of milk the IP and gave us something completely different. So that there is a balance to it. Like I mean, I wouldn't say like completely deviate from it, especially if you're going to be using similar characters. But yeah, like find ways to twist and turn the story to keep the long-term fans guessing, and also being able to hold on to the newcomers as well, because there were a lot of newcomers onto this. So I mean, it's easier said than done when it comes to finding that balance, in my opinion.
I feel like we've seen a couple, like even something that dropped relatively the same time. I know you haven't watched any Adventure Time stuff yet, but the Fiona and Cake show that just recently came out on HBO, I had a preconceived notion of what it was going to be because I've seen that character, that run of stuff spin off during the actual show, and I watched this and I'm like, this is amazing. This is a direct spin-off of a verse that I have familiarity with, but they're telling their own story. We've seen that with that. We talked about that like just recently.
Was that live action or animated?
That's animated.
It's animated, but it's in regards to you retelling instead of just. I see your point there. As far as that one may not be the most accurate one, but something similar, like something we talked about it with like Velma, right? Like doing something new with something that's already established and something that's similar, and not just.
Yeah, but that didn't
and
work.
Look how that turned out. Yeah.
Well, no, we talked about we want that completely. Like they just literally carbon copied those characters in there and made shit like weird versus telling a different story.
Those aren't the same characters.
I feel like those are completely different characters. They just have the name.
Those are not the same characters at all. That's a completely different thing. So what I will say that is this. Here's an example that we did bring up last time. Was talking about the My Adventure with Superman. How that is essentially it is not retelling, but it is a new take on the source material that for the most part we all agree that it works. We all enjoyed that. That's the idea of what if we took Superman when he was young, essentially an intern, made his best friend Jimmy Olsen, and made that Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen basically knew from the jump who he was. We did that try and go that route, and it actually worked. That's a different version though. However, that's a completely different story. That's not the story we've seen before done over and over again. And with manga, as y'all can attest to, manga has the same writer creator working on it the entire time, its entirety, and it's one story. So when you change things, it's like this is a different version. There's no fanfic that's done like a Batman. There's so many different Batman stories that have been told over the years since since the late great Bill Finger wrote it. There's so many different versions. Any story you tell of Batman is fine now because essentially there's so many different versions. It's all
fanfic.
It's all fanfic. Why not? But with One Piece, for example, there's only been one story or one narrative over all these 20 plus years done by Oda. So if you do any variation, anything you deviate from that, it is essentially going too far off the beaten path. By the way, Oda was involved with this show pretty heavily. So and there were lots of things.
Literally had to redo half the season to fit towards Oda standards.
Yeah, he actually pushed back against a bunch of different things and actually wanted to, and fought them on certain things. And certain things he lost on, but certain things he won on. So I mean, he was involved with it too. So it's a much harder thing you might think to get done.
Because at the end of the day, people just don't like new shit. Like even like we talked about the Batman stuff, all those alternate versions and those fan fictions that are really beloved. Not for a lot of that stuff too. People did not like originally with certain characters. People did not like certain characters or innovative things originally because people don't like giving new things a chance. But I think it's almost like giving kids their medicine in the sense of like you're not gonna like this initially, but if you're doing something and you're doing it if you're putting all the right things around it, people are gonna be skeptical of the thing at first until they actually until they let down their preconceived judgments on what this thing would be and kind of give it a chance. Because we've seen it a lot with different music between any different form of media entertainment, from music to animation to just, I don't see reality TV, just TV in general, where something's like, oh, it comes out, people hate it. And then you see that post 10 years later to where, oh, this is low key underrated. I don't know why we don't talk about this thing anymore. And now it's a whole like cult following behind it now. I'm not saying this is one of those things, but I'm saying as far as doing something different, people are never going to like that new thing or new thing at first, especially with something like this that isn't even finished all the way yet.
Right, it's the same effect with just about everything. You don't necessarily appreciate it until it's done. That's why I hate grading things before they're over, because the end is really important. It's the same thing with like Michael Jordan, Kobe. While they were playing, they were not beloved. They were talked about as ball hogs and called assholes, this, that, and the third. It wasn't until both of them retired that we go back and like, oh, there's the Mamba mentality. Oh, Jordan's the GOAT. Like, while they were playing, all the criticism.
There are literally articles out about Jordan saying that you can never win that way. Like being a ball hog and scoring, you will never win a championship that way. 6 years later, 9 years later, now it's insane. But yeah, I agree.
But you're both right that it does. Time is a real test for everything, as far as like if anything actually holds up, if fans like it or not. And it's something that I talked about last night about how like fans in our community are very toxic, especially blurred fans are very toxic. It can be very, doesn't matter what you do, it's hard to satisfy some people. That's why this thing is kind of broken a few molds, because it actually has, even though it may have some criticism, it's had some positive reception too. For the most part, these things never get any kind of positive reception. This has actually had some positive reception, quite a bit of positive reception, to be honest with y'all. I mean, there are people actually excited to see. If you guys watch any reactions to people watching episodes, like, oh my gosh, that's there, and this is really interesting, this is kind of fun. Of course, they have all kinds of gripes, but they still have lots of, they're actually enjoying something about it. There was nothing to enjoy about Death Note or Cowboy Bebop, or or Dragon Ball Z Evolution.
Jet Black.
Yeah, fair. That's fair. But I mean, there's so many that oftentimes the cons are so overwhelming compared to the pros. For this to have any positive feedback is a test of time. It's a testament of some kind. So it's moving the needle in the right direction.
So to create a kind of a question off of that spinoff, Otis, for you specifically, me and Ethan had this conversation playing Remnant, I think last night or the night before. Do you believe that Black nerds are the most difficult to please when it comes to just things like nerd media or content that comes out in general? Because for a lot of the time we talked about it, like we'll see in groups a lot of criticism on something that drops, and then if you go look at like any other mass media outlet that we know is more white centric or that involves everybody else, that thing usually has like high scores. But whenever I look in our groups, it's like getting a super high amount of criticism.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely a hard group to please, and honestly, we should be, because we actually like have standards. I think a lot of fandoms have like significantly less than that. Because like, I mean, how the fuck did Thor get a Thor 4? I would never understand that.
Right.
But I mean, yeah, like I there are a lot more criticisms in the blurred community, but I think they're valid a lot of the time. And sometimes it's okay to actually question a thing that's counter to the popular opinion. That's when you actually find some level of truth there, when it's not too positive and too negative. At least in my opinion.
Fair enough. And it's not like us asking that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was an observation that I noticed from being in the space now for a couple years. Well, shit, like 2018 now at this point. So I have a little bit of skin in the game in regards to being in the community. But yeah, did you have something you wanted to say, Ethan?
The one thing that I was touching on at the end was, I do think we need to find a balance. I think that the most progress comes from constructive and negative criticism. If we're just bashing something without offering any solutions towards making it better, or trying ourselves to do something about it, nothing's going to happen from that. It's easy to throw spears at something and be angry about something without putting you said putting your skin in, having your own skin in the game. I think that having your own skin in the game is when you're actually trying to do something yourself, trying to make your own, trying to actually create something yourself and see how hard it is to do. It's very easy for people to say, "Oh, I could do better than that. I can write better than that." Be a money winning quarterback and never actually get into a game. So I give all the props in the world to those artists, to creators, to people who actually are trying to do something and failing, as opposed to those who are talking about it and not doing shit.
So the transition into part of the thumbnail, I know you mentioned you wanted Ahsoka to be part of this conversation as well. What was your reasoning for that, Ethan?
So my reason for that is because I feel like Dave Filoni, the creator of Ahsoka from back in the days of Clone Wars, and of course
Mm-hmm.
brought her into Rebels, which he also created. Dave Filoni made this is his first foray, not first foray, but is his foray with his own IP, first foray into his own IP into
Mm-hmm.
doing the live action, right? I know he worked on Mandalorian, but that wasn't his original character. That was Favreau's for the most part. The thing about this is watching him adapt essentially season 5 of Rebels into live action. I'm curious what y'all's take on it is. Did either of you see Rebels, the animated series?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a good series. It was a good series, lots of fun to watch. Watching him try to direct, at least for a couple episodes, the live action version of Ahsoka, it's interesting because I'm sure y'all have heard the criticism of Rosario Dawson's performance as Ahsoka or seen this show is like, this may look like Rebels season 5, but it's not the same show. Rebels had a different kind of energy to it. Ahsoka had a different kind of energy to her. And watching them do this live action, there's a stiffness to it.
She's a lot more stoic. Like
It's a lot more stoic. And the reason I bring that up is because, again, it's adapting from one medium to another. I'm not saying it's a bad show. I still enjoy watching it, but it's definitely not the same thing. And the question is, do we need to have Ahsoka be live action? Should it have been live action?
So for me personally, I don't think it's that different off. Like there are some beats in Rebels that are different because it was its core, or at least the public perception of it, it was a children's show. It was made for a particular age group. So you're gonna have those spins of like happy-go-lucky stuff. But for a lot of the moments there was a lot of dark. Like they had Palpatine force sorcering, like destroying shit through space time, and like Ahsoka died in Rebels at one point. So like the darkness of it and like the tone of it, I think carried over. And in regards to the performance and it being accurate, I think a lot of people didn't watch Rebels, honestly, because from what I'm noticing from a lot of that controversy, people want Ahsoka, this version of Ahsoka, to be very similar to the Clone Wars version of her, in which she was a lot younger and a lot more immature in different moments. If you watch her in Rebels, she's a lot more stoic in Rebels. She's a lot more of that master mentality and observing more before she jumps into action. And to me, that seems more accurate to what this character is now. You can see that in just the way that she fights now. She isn't just using one form of saber combat to be overly aggressive and overwhelm her opponent. She's adding in different styles and handling things from different perspectives to get the job done. But to your main question, as far as like the adaptation aspect of it, I think this is significantly different for the fact of this IP all started in live action. Like this started from a movie, and you saw what worked and what didn't work from the movie. So it's like the animated version was the adaptation, and then they just changed things up. Like Ahsoka herself as a character, yes, is new, but like making her look right, like you've seen her people depicted on screen already with the costume and makeup. So you've had plenty of examples of what to do and what not to do since the 80s when it came out to now. How lightsabers work, music, different things. Like you've had enough success to be like, all right, this is the formula of success for this. These are characters that we haven't put on screen before, but we know what works and what doesn't work now. Especially somebody like Filoni from the writing aspect, like you have that person that knows how to write this character. I think all the harder parts of this are kind of covered, honestly. Like you have the formula and the recipe for this to be good. So if you fumble the bag, it's more so on you, I guess. Like he has everything he needs to make this successful.
It's on the viewer for public.
Well, not the viewer, but I'm talking about like Filoni himself. Like you know what works and you know what people like, and if you just don't give that to people, or you don't do that in the right way,
do they know what works?
Well, again,
he does.
We also saw Boba Fett.
Yeah, but he's also saw the first. You saw like the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian,
and we also saw that 3rd season of The Mandalorian.
You did.
Again, but Filoni wasn't directing as much of The Mandalorian, really. It was more Favreau and the other team. And Filoni was involved with the writing, essentially, and the storytelling, which is he's really good at that. He's really good at that. But directing live action, Filoni isn't as well. No, doesn't have as much involvement with that.
He's an amazing writer.
He's a great writer and storyteller, and so that's kind of where the difference lies. Is being able to. There's a difference between directing live action and directing animation. It's a very big difference.
Right. So I'm like, so then that being the case, like, you know how to write this character, you have that, you know how to make these characters look good and what people like as far as the aesthetics go, because you've had examples from the 80s till now, what to do, what not to do, and what's difficult and what's not difficult to do. And directing, it just comes down to picking out the right directors for these episodes. And so far, I think they've had the right collection of directors. Well, I mean, again, the series isn't over yet, but up until this point, I've enjoyed the show and the shots and the way things have been done so far. I don't have too many issues with it that aren't nitpicky from a super fanboy perspective of the character, because this is my favorite character in Star Wars. But yeah, I think that is the caveat there, is that this has been done multiple times before since the 80s, so you kind of know what to do and what not to do.
But I mean, think of, one thing I'll say real quick on this: look at the difference between Star Wars episodes 4 through 6 compared to Star Wars episodes 1 through 3.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so just because there's a blueprint or a roadmap of something that's been done before that worked well, you know, according to most people, doesn't mean it's gonna work the same way every time. And then also look at Star Wars episode 1 through 3 compared to Star Wars episodes 7 through 9. So, yeah, go ahead, Otis.
Now, I was just gonna say that. I mean, what was I gonna say? Well, essentially, I don't think that they have anything mastered about how they're presenting Star Wars, because like they're still hitting and missing in all different places. I mean, like, so like the biggest difference that I've seen between Ahsoka and Rebels is I mean, Ahsoka is a lot slower paced. I feel like it is very, very almost melancholy at some spots. This is like, yeah, like you can pick this up. Like when the action is going and the music is going along with the tone of that, Ahsoka is phenomenal. But like some of the conversations between them still seem very stiff and forced at times. Like the most vibrant character feels like the robot. You know, it's like how do you pull that off?
Yeah. I think that's in regard. So did you watch the last season 8 of the Clone Wars, right? Because to me, that had a very similar tone in how that was done.
Granted, that was way better. That was way better.
It was animated, so it has a little bit of an animation bias there. In regards, not you having a bias on that, but like in regards to how I think me and Ethan agree. I think animation is a superior form of media personally, and I think things just look better animated if you do it right. But the tone was very similar. A lot of the conversations was very similar in how they were. I think this is just because we haven't seen Ahsoka really deal with a lot of she's been through a lot of shit and literally like disappeared from like the Clone Wars up until that last season. And that was like 7 episodes. And then we saw her in Rebels for like 4 or 5 episodes, and she died, and they brought her back to life.
That has nothing to do with how dry some of the dialogue gets in the episodes. That has nothing to do with that at all, actually.
In regards to you were talking about how things seem melancholy. The dialogue option, that's just, again, that's how you feel about it.
That's what makes it melancholy.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I know where you're coming from, Soups. I do. But I think what we're saying ultimately is there's a lot of, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the memes and stuff. Ahsoka is standing around with her arms folded like Vegeta, half asleep a lot of the time. And the dialogue is very, it's not that it's bad, but it's very like so slowly paced. It seems so dry. The camera shots, the angles, the cinematography seems very much
like nobody is excited for this at all.
They're not excited.
Was hyped. Like,
yeah, they're not excited. There was a part. So I saw someone break down as far as like there's a part where in the spoiler alert for episode 2, right, where Sabine is trying to disarm a bomb, or there's basically a bomb will go off if she doesn't do something in a limited amount of time, right? They compared that scene with in episode 7. Where Rey is trying to communicate to Finn about something in a heightened state. And she's like, no, you're over there. She's actually using her emotions. She's emoting, talking to him. And he's like, what do you want me to do? They're actually doing that. And they show the scene where Sabine is disarming the bomb in episode 2. And she's like literally sitting there in bed. Asuka is staying there very calm. Hera's like looking eyes around. It's like, there's no, like, you guys, this is a bomb. You should be like concerned. Where is the concern here? I know we're talking about. I don't mean to go back and forth too much, but with One Piece, there's no doubt that Luffy is acting. He's alive.
There's emotion there.
There's emotion. There's emotion. Usopp when Usopp had to convey certain things about thinking that the pirates are there, going to kill his his best friend. He was emoting. So it's like it's okay to emote. It's okay to emote.
Yeah, like I don't know if you remember the old commercial. I'm showing my age here, but those old Clear Eyes commercials.
Yeah, of
That's
course.
that's the energy that every episode brings when the conversation starts. It's like, oh, you have to put this in there so this whole building doesn't explode. Can you do that for me? Lightsaber battle. Like that's,
Hey,
that's
I haven't seen it. I know maybe whenever, because at least from my perspective, whenever I've made a post or seen any dialogue over this show, I've seen nothing but rave reviews on this particular stuff. So this is my first time hearing this particular criticism of the show. I haven't seen it, but I take your criticism to heart. I understand if that's. I personally haven't seen it.
It's understandable. Also, there's
but the bomb point to your bomb point though, I think that just makes sense for the fact Ahsoka's been through a literal war, has gone against literal multiple bombs in that show. They've had a lot. She's been through a lot of those scenarios beforehand. So you getting kind of wild out. I think the one bomb she went through was like a contagion that would have been a virus to infect an entire, that would have pretty much committed genocide on a planet. So I'm like, you go from that to like a regular bomb. I don't know. Like to me, like if I were to see somebody like if I were to see Ip Man get concerned about fighting somebody, I'm like, bro, you've been in a million fights. Why are you super freaking out? And because Rey and Finn haven't been in any situation like that up until that point, so you're gonna freak out. But
I think
to me that makes sense from a writing standpoint, though, and why she's gonna be calm. She's gonna be very calm. Like it'd be like for me, it feels inconsistent of that character to do that like that when like you've been the worst of the worst shit in your 30 years of life, and why does this thing scare you when you've seen Darth Vader in person and you've died? So
I see what you're saying, and Otis keeps saying. The thing is, what I'm saying is, I'm not gonna say you're making excuses. What I'm gonna say is, I get where you're coming from as far as being in character, but you have to also make sure you're aware of the medium, and you don't want to bore the fan. If your fans are getting bored with your characters on screen during a bomb sequence, that's a problem. I don't care what the character is. You have to do something to make it entertaining on some level. Keep it in character with Ahsoka. You see how episode was it? It was season 8 where all the things. I mean, not to get too into spoilers for Clone Wars, but there's a lot of shit happening to Ahsoka in that episode, and she's dealing with it as best she can. But there are times. I remember one scene in particular where she's talking to Rex, where Rex is like freaking out, and she pretty much tries to calm Rex down, basically. And you see Rex is crying, but Ahsoka is still emoting as she's talking to him, trying to calm him down. It could be something similar to Ahsoka trying to calm down Sabine when she's freaking out. The bomb's going to go off. Or it could have a scene where Hera's like, we got to do something, help her out. Or you could have Hera saying, help her out, Ahsoka, help her out, do something with her. And see Ahsoka actually moving her hands like, calm down, we got this, doing something. She literally, I watched the scene again, she literally stands there with her arms folded and does basically nothing. That's not conveying character. That's conveying, like you said, like Oda said before, a lack of like passion. So it's all, my ultimate point is just trying to entertain your audience as best you can. That's all.
When you're talking about flat, Hera is even more flat than Ahsoka is, because like,
where?
Like, when does she show emotion at all? Like, where does she like give me a second where he's like, oh, like I'm convinced that this is a general of an army.
So literally, again, so the most recent one, because this is the most recent episode I watched, so I can call this scene verbatim of her literally leaving the hangar and like disobeying an order, and she's having that conversation with that guy, and she's being Hera Syndulla. She's like, "What am I gonna do?" He's like, "You'll figure it out." And she's talking to her son. She's like, "Well, when you're a general, you can do whatever you want to do." Like, I'm getting that. Like again, me watching Rebels, I'm seeing that character. This feels like that character, what she would do in that scenario. I think the difference is keeping in mind, like Ahsoka then is not Ahsoka now. Ahsoka was 18, maybe in her early 20s at that point of the Clone Wars, versus now where she's been through some ungodly shit up until that point. To like at least for me, the way I'm seeing her arc now, she's written to where she's not really showing a lot of emotion, and she's very distant. And you see that from the beginning of the show up until now, even in her interactions and her relationships, for everybody's telling her, hey, you should probably like chill out a little bit and not be as fucking like stoic and cold to Sabine. You need to be her master more and show her some compassion. Even in the most recent episode with the robot saying like, hey, stick together. Don't fucking divert on your own. To me, that's part of her arc and what this character is going through right now. But hey, if you're not a super fan of it, I get it. Part of the stuff too, I'm also hanging on every word because I'm getting little tidbits of like the writing aspect of it too. They're throwing in a lot of references to a lot of older stuff. So it's not going to hit the same for somebody that either doesn't know the references or just doesn't care. versus the super fan. Yeah, he just doesn't care. For me, I'm eating this shit up because I'm like, oh, I remember that. I know that.
Right.
And I think that's how Filoni's done a lot of his, like at least from the Clone Wars and different stuff he's worked on. He does that a lot. Like they do, him and Favreau do that a lot in the Mandos. He's in a lot of different stuff they do. I don't know. Again, I'm very biased, so I'm very much.
It's fine. We all have our biases. We all have our biases. I think it's okay to be biased. That's going to happen. But the thing about you got to remember is you're trying to. This show is trying to, as best it can, bring new fans in. It doesn't necessarily expect everyone that's watching to have watched all 4 seasons of Rebels and all, I guess, 8 seasons of Clone Wars. It can't expect that. I know there are people that are watching this that have not seen those things. There are some that have seen parts of it, but haven't seen all of it. And they have to expect that some people are going to be non-super fans, going to be very casuals that are watching this. So if the case is the only show people that will watch this, that will enjoy this, are super fans, you made a mistake. You have to at least try to be inclusive with everybody. Again, going back to One Piece wasn't trying to say, hey, this is only for the super fans. It was trying to be as inclusive as possible. Granted, it is starting from the very beginning, but the way they had it set up with the Easter eggs and things like that nature is like if you see them, cool. If you don't, whatever. It's meant to be as much as it can be for the general masses.
So this sounds like a repeat of a question that we had on a episode way back when. I think this episode Otis wasn't here for this one. We have a clip of it on the TikTok. I remember because I edited this thing, where the conversation in question was, at what point do you do things to appease your fans, people that have supported you over a long period of time, that are giving you money for a long period of time and making sure you do what you do, versus try to appeal to a new fan base? Because from my perspective, yes, you do want to appeal to a new fan base, but that fan base is going to be new people are going to be very volatile. They don't have that skin in the game per se, like we mentioned earlier, to repeat another phrase. At least for me personally, philosophy-wise, people that support me and that are down for me from the very beginning and have stayed with me over a period of time, I'm going to cater what I do to those people. And if new people come on, I'm great and I'm appreciative of that thing, of them coming in. But I'm doing that and knowing that they could dip at any moment because they don't have any sense of not, I won't say loyalty because that sounds kind of toxic, but any sense of connection or link to this thing. And to me, that I kind of use that philosophy in all forms of a thing, because you see a lot with like musicians, right? Where somebody's like, oh, well, this isn't the old version of that person, or this isn't what I expected because I only tune in here and there to listen to this artist, versus a fan that's appreciating this person's evolution, and that you're not just a fan of what's hot at the time, but you're a fan of this thing. For me, that's why necessarily I'm loving it, because I'm getting, as a Ahsoka fan, as a Star Wars fan, I'm getting everything I can ask for. Even some of they're about to get into retconning some stuff, which I won't spoil too much because we talked about not doing spoilers too much. But for me, I'm not mad at that personally, because that casual fan, they're going to pop in and out and they're going to be very volatile. You could appease them one day, but as soon as you do something wrong the next day, they're going to drop this thing like a sacrifice. But those fans are like, as a Star Wars fan, I have a very abusive relationship with Star Wars, because sometimes I'll get amazing content like the Clone Wars, and sometimes I get the new trilogy. But I stay on board because I love the IP as a whole. So when you're doing things to appease the people that are riding with you through thick and thin, I think that's who you should prioritize your content toward, because they're the ones making sure your content continues on, personally. But that's just my belief in stuff.
Otis, you gonna say something?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my belief is probably pretty similar to Charlie. You make sure you appease the people that have been your core fan base for the longest, but you also try to make sure you're telling the best narrative that you possibly can at the end of the day.
Right.
Like that's priority one. Tell the best story, but of course you want to have as many drawbacks to the people that have been with you for as long as possible to continue going forward, because that's who's going to spend money on your merchandise. That's who's going to talk about your series to their friends and spread the word about it. So yeah, that's something that I wish the producers at Marvel would understand a little bit more when they do all these things about, oh, we're not making this for the fans. Who the fuck are you making it for then?
So I gotta push back. A movie, like the guys are gonna stop watching it. Like they're just gonna stop.
But I gotta push back a little bit against my brothers here, because especially with Marvel, the reason those Marvel movies made, the reason the MCU made billions of dollars, isn't because of comic book fans. No. It's because of the super casuals, people who never even heard of Iron Man, whatnot beforehand. They got the money from the super casuals. Think about how comic books were dying off. Comic books were going bankrupt. So if you're only going to get the fans that aren't even really buying your product in the comic book shops to actually watch your movies, my friend, you're gonna be shit out of luck. So they knew they had to appeal to movie audiences in general. It's the same thing when it comes to doing adaptations of. I mean, this show, they know that obviously a majority of the fan base that watched the Clone Wars animated series were probably kids or younger audiences, but they wanted to appeal to as many people as possible. What they call the four quadrant: young, old, male, female. So you have to find a way to kind of strike up, like I said, a balance. Yes, you do want to appease the hardcore fans that have been there with you for the whole time, of course, but you also have to be able to kind of spread your wings. You have to be able to make sure you get in new fans too. Otherwise, you'll die on the vine.
Well, just to add some kind of context to the Marvel conversation specifically, wasn't a big significant part of the reason those comics were dying out were because they were betraying the core fans. From my knowledge, it was a thing of they had comics out and people bought comics because they felt like a collector thing. There's a finite amount of these things, so they had intrinsic value. But when Marvel went and other comic companies went about mass printing these things is when they started losing value and people stopped buying comics as often because they don't have intrinsic value. And that's
well, then let's say that let's go the route. Let's say that's true. Then what you just said before was negated because you said the hardcore writer fans would never leave, but they were leaving.
Yeah, because you didn't do things to appease them. Like they still stuck around. Like people were still familiar with these characters. And when the whole Blade thing came around, like at the end of the day, I feel like because those characters, like even something like with Sony, right, where they took Spider-Man out and they did Sony shit with Spider-Man. People were still watching that shit because they're fans of Spider-Man and of that IP. They're going to watch it. Even though the mass agreement on something or majority agreement is that it's ass, people still went to go watch it because they're fans of this thing and they want the best for this thing.
Well, I think a big majority of the audience that saw Spider-Man too, yeah, all of them were fans of the comics and that nature, but Spider-Man, a lot of the people that saw it weren't just fans of comic books, they were just regular fans. There was moviegoers that saw a good movie or want to see a good movie, essentially, too.
My point is, do you need that, though? Do you, like, you have that mass success of everybody, but do you really need that? As long as you're getting return invest, like if you build something for core fans and you're getting return investment and you're making a profit, do you need this $1 billion profit you got before? No, you're still successful.
If you're spending $18 million an episode live action for One Piece, you better believe they want to get as many eyes on it as possible. If you're spending,
I want to. But did you need to though? Because we just
earlier
talked about
yes. Studios lose money. They don't want to lose money.
Yeah, they lose money because they do the most. You don't need to. We just spoke about earlier on the aspect of like homemade cosplays looking better than these projects with $1 billion, $1 million budgets. If they're doing that with their own extra spending money, you can make a project for a affordable budget and make a return investment. It's because you're throwing money in it. Like you're using the business mentality of if I invest more money into this thing, I want to get a return profit. We've talked about it before. These people that are in power with this content, they think of shit as purely business and they don't really understand how the fan or why the fan even likes this thing to begin with. That's how you have really popular, like something as popular as Dragon Ball Z Abridged itself, where literally all of this is somebody redubbing something beat for beat, but they're adding their own creative spins and playing into the lore more of what people enjoy, what memes were, and what they understand what the culture of that thing is. And they made buku amounts of money while spending finite amounts of money to actually produce that thing in retrospect of what they got back. You don't need to spend that much stuff, but they're doing it because they feel like they have to, and they're not approaching it from a creator and a fan mindset.
I see. I do see what you're saying. Go ahead, Otis.
Yeah, I agree with Charlie because I mean, again, if you have your narrative at a point where it is just genuine quality, like your storytelling is good, I think new audiences are going to just go into it from the hype of the first one. Like, I really feel like just making sure you maintain your core audience and also find ways to innovate upon the stories that you're telling them while still making products that are at a high enough level to attract more attention. I think that's way more valuable than trying to specifically appease new fans because new fans don't even know what they're coming on for in the first place.
People have pack mentality.
They're not mutually exclusive, though. I mean, I think you can. Like you're talking about Dragon Ball Z Abridged. No one watched Dragon Ball Z Abridged that hasn't seen Dragon Ball Z already because those jokes don't land with them. It doesn't matter.
I can highly disagree with that. That's 100% inaccurate.
Well, what I will say about this, though, obviously that content isn't theirs. That was something that was already created before. All they had to do was basically, like you said, it was very minimal effort and not effort, but really very minimal money because all they had to do was redub some things. They wrote a good script, of course, to make some jokes. but it's not about them actually having to produce episodes from scratch or make an IP from scratch. So I'm ultimately, and we can go back and forth on this for days and days and weekends forever, but it's ultimately studios have extremely bloated budgets. That's a fact. That's why blockbusters are failing, miserably this past summer. I get that, but you have to understand that they do want to produce the highest quality product they possibly can, because odds are the higher the quality of the product is, the more eyes it'll draw, more attention it'll draw. The reason the MCU was more successful than the Flash is because the Flash's CGI look like ass. That's part of it. The reason that the MCU's movies look better is because they spend more time and effort on the CGI and everything else there too. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, let's just make it this extremely cheap and expect the hardcore fans to be enough hype to get new eyes on the product. They want to make as much money as possible. And oftentimes the best way to do that is you got to spend money to make money. You have to invest into it to make it really better. I mean, right here, all of us right here have worked on a comic book, right? Mm-hmm. All of us have. And all of us have spent money on that. What's one of the things you had to spend money on to make a comic book? An artist. Would you be happy having a crappy artist work on your book and say, hey, man, this is for the hardcore fans, people who know what my story's about? Or would you say, you know what, I know I need to invest a little bit of money in getting a good artist, a good colorist, a good team to make the best story possible?
Okay, so using that same analogy, you have an artist that you've worked with for a while. You know what this artist is capable of. You know they do good work. Would you then go from paying them, let's say you're paying them $100 to just paying them $2 million just because you have the budget for it? Or can you pay them a reasonable amount of, like, oh, I have the budget, I can probably go from 100 to 1,000, but not 18 million? That's my point. It's like kind of what Otis has. My point is, so like to Otis's point earlier, right? If you have something like One Piece where the core fan base liked it because of the initial writing and what it was initially, before you had billions or millions of dollars put into it, you can replicate that without putting that same amount in there. People I don't think they're understanding why people like this thing to begin with. It's like having, like, if you have a really good burger, right? Like, let's say you got 100% beef Angus burger and it's amazing, but then you spend an extra $500 putting caviar on top. Why? It didn't enhance it in any way. You're doing it just because you can, because you're trying to flex, or because you're hoping that it makes it taste better. Like caviar or gold flakes, these are aesthetic things that you're just spending money on just because you can. You don't have to. The thing will still be amazing regardless, or it'll be bad regardless. It's not enhancing. So
let me ask you,
it's empty calories to me is what I'm saying with these budgets.
I got you. Let me ask you this real quick. You mentioned before the fan films that have been done for, like, let's say One Piece or even the Dragon Ball Z live action fan films, things like that nature. Mm-hmm. Are the budget for those things, even the Star Wars fan films, right? There's some good ones out there too. Mm-hmm. They won't spend. They'll be as conservative with their budget as they possibly can, and they'll find ways, shortcuts to get things done.
Right.
But with this show, for example, with One Piece, they built lots of elaborate, large sets. They built actual ships. They actually built those type of things. They have a massive cast. They have lots of extras. They do have CGI involved with these things. They do have lots of long budgets as far as shooting and the lighting, all these different types of things. These things do take money and they do take time. You have fan films and you have fan shows and things of that nature. They're considerably shorter, and they have a lot smaller casts. I get where you're coming from, but to have a full-on production, it does take resources. There's no way around that.
I'm not saying it. So, for instance, using that point of the boats, Otis, you finished the series, right? You finished all of One Piece so far and what they had on Netflix? Mm-hmm. So tell me, from your experience of watching it, how many shots or how much time do they spend on or in the ships?
Quite a bit, especially later on when they get to a certain spot within the series. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
They're walking through the ships. There's scenes dedicated specifically to the ships.
So my question would be, do you think you would get the same effect if they either went and rented a ship that's already in existence or recreated that ship somewhere else? Because you've seen in a lot of films and a lot of shows where they need to be either on a pirate ship or somewhere similar, you can recreate or build parts of a set that you need. You don't need to build an entire fucking pirate boat to get that same scene done.
If it was a different series, then maybe. But the Going Merry is a very iconic part of the One Piece universe. So cheaping out on there would have pissed off a lot of fans. A lot of them.
To build an entire ship?
Yeah.
That's the thing I'm saying. It's not mutually exclusive. You're trying to appease the fans. You can't always appease the fans and then skimp out on things too. It doesn't always work that way.
I don't know. Maybe maybe that's because I'm looking at something like Star Wars, right? Where you have the Millennium Falcon is an iconic thing, but when they made that thing, they didn't build an entire fucking spaceship from the ground up. They built parts of it, or they built a hollowed out version of it. They built different.
You're talking about the one from the 70s movies?
Yeah.
They built that.
They built
They
built miniatures.
They built it affordably. They didn't spend extra millions of dollars of budgets on the Millennium Falcon specifically just because.
Well, the thing is, they had other ships and they had so many other miniatures and sets to build too. So
right.
I mean,
miniatures, right? Not an entire 50-foot spaceship. They had one.
Well, it's a different scenario.
Ship often,
but it's a different scenario because you're inside the Millennium Falcon. You're outside the Going Merry.
Yeah. So what you see, from production, a lot of times what you see in scenes where they build a room that is the inside of a setting, and then they have a model which is the outside of that setting.
Right.
You see it in a lot of like when it haunted house films or whatever else, where
right.
they literally built a room, but they don't ever show you. You're not going to walk from outside to inside the house. They're like, oh, here's
right.
a shot inside of the room. Here's a shot of the outside of the building, and this thing's hollow. You building 15 houses from the ground up for a film is not necessary, is my point. Like, you can find ways that are being affordable is not being cheap. Being frugal is not being cheap. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. You can do something for a reasonable price without spending an overabundance of money in it. And I think that's why a lot of these films are, like you talk about in Hollywood, are dying because they're spending way more money than they need to be and praying to God they get a return investment on it.
Sure. No, that's fair. I do think we can notice.
It's like there's more, a lot more nuance to that than you think. Just because, again, there's one for a spaceship. You don't have to have shots like standing on top of a spaceship, so you don't need to
right.
Actually fully build the thing, right? For a actual on water ship, most of your shots are gonna be from outside of the ship looking at the ship. So if the ship doesn't look like a ship, you can't really actually pull off those shots the way that you need to, especially for things like naval battles, for sea monster attacks. Like the ship, this particular example is a bad one just because One Piece specifically, the Mary, when the Mary was destroyed in the anime, spoilers for people who haven't gotten that far, that was a death treated like how they did the third Hokage in Naruto. It's an important aspect of it that if you don't get it right, the fans are going to be like, that's not the Mary, that's the Go. That's something else. Or
yeah.
So
I mean, Luffy literally calls it a character. It's the ship is a character in the series.
When it gets destroyed, there's an actual soul that leaves it on screen the anime. That's a thing that happened.
I forgot about
that.
That's right.
I want to show you guys an example of what I mean, and kind of not negating what you said, but part of the reason and why I think that's somewhat invalid. And I'm not going to play the whole thing. I've been looking for the specific part, and this is directly. I think this matters because it's in direct reference to a series that almost mirrors that thing. Where is it at? Where's the part I'm looking for? But you can keep talking to your point. I gotta scroll through the video.
So I'll just piggyback off what Otis is saying. For another example, that of course is the Pirates movies, the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. They actually did have ships. They had real ships they used. I mean, they had lots of ships they really used for that. But again, they were able to pull from actual vessels that had been around before. Gore Verbinski and them, they were able to find ships that still existed. They were able to pull from them. But however, they had a lot of destruction, a lot of things, a lot of actual battles and stuff like that too. So they had to build actual practical effects and practical ships to do lots of these things. That does take time and money to do that. So if you were trying to skimp too hard or save money too hard in certain areas, it shows and it will hurt your production. All over with Luffy and not Luffy, with the whole One Piece, there were plenty of sets they built that they did save money on. For example, we see the exterior of the ship that Garp is riding in a lot, but it's mostly probably is a set. We see a set on the dock, or we see him actually in his office. So they did find ways to save money on that. They didn't have to build necessarily a big old, battleship for that, but they did have to build it. But they did have to build a Going Merry. At a certain time, you can save money if you can't.
this example, I'm not going to play the audio for copyright reasons. I don't want to see a struck. I'm just play a couple seconds of this thing. Speaking of Pirates of the Caribbean, this is exactly what I meant in regards of how they go about producing these things without having to spend a large amount on it. So as you can see, this is like the death row scene from I think Pirates 2, right?
Yeah.
Where they did a good bit of this stuff on screen and they built like a whole CGI set. Where you just saw, let me go back. Just make sure we can see it again.
That's not a whole CGI set.
Costs?
Like renting one of those or building or buying one of those versus actually spending billions of dollars to go to a fucking rock fall to do this stunt itself. At least for me, that's significantly cheaper versus risking doing that on a legit cliff versus spending money on that. I guarantee
that's not a one-to-one. That's not a one. It's not a
one-to-one ratio, but this is an example of ways they can go about it. I've seen them do this on pirate ships. As far as them, like you talked about the ships, they've had parts of ships and CGI the other parts of it and just added to it digitally. That's how they get around doing different things like that. And that's how they do that affordably.
Wait. I think we may be losing some of the point here. Let me understand.
My point's being you don't need to spend especially with the ship aspect of it. You don't need to build an entire ship from the ground up. When I've seen other films that have had amazing, probably better pirate ship battles than anything else that's been out, especially when it comes to at World's End with that fucking whirlpool battle. They did a lot of that through building decks, not whole ships, but just the deck part and CGIing everything else in and giving you the illusion that there's an entire ship there. I don't think you need to spend that much money on a whole ship.
Are you upset that
I'm not upset? I'm trying to understand your reasoning for spending that much money just because.
It's not just because. As Oda said before, the reason is because you're trying to make the actual where you can. You're trying to make bring to life a very big part of the series as best you can. Obviously, they were able to. There are shortcuts they can use. I told you how with Garp's ship. I know they didn't build a big old battleship, but they did build a large deck that housed that showed him and his whole crew on there, and they also built a set for his office. However, with the Going Merry, because it's a much smaller vessel, and they are staying on the outside on the deck of it multiple times, and you see Luffy sitting on the actual head of the ship or the mast multiple times. They had to have something built practically for that. They had to be something practical for it. You can use blue screens. Of course, you can use blue screens, but in that clip you just showed, it showed they were using blue screens when it was swinging back, but then also it showed them actually in the jungle for real, running through the grass with that basket, with that big, huge thing they built. Oh, by the way, that was a real, human bone,
real cage,
everything, real cage they made. So there are times it's about combining techniques. It's about combining blue screen when you can use blue screen,
right?
And by combining practical effects, you can use practical effects. They aren't mutually exclusive, and but what I was trying to get at before, though, what I was trying to understand was, are you upset that shows or movies are using or spending money? Do you think that spending money is a bad thing?
No, I'm saying they're spending unnecessary money. I'm not saying to your point, you can use a combination of the two. You can use green screen. You can spend extra money to making sure you're reserved, kind of what they do with an MCU film, right? If I really want to get a really good shot off or a scene off inside of a city, I'm going to spend a little bit of extra money to reserve this portion of Atlanta to film this thing like they do a lot of the time. They just reserve off areas. You can do that. But for a series in which you're spending $18 million every single episode, I feel like something like that's necessarily unnecessary to me personally. Granted, I have to see what they're spending that amount of money on or what the budget's going to per episode. But I feel like there are moments where you can be affordable but not be cheap. Just because you're making something affordable, it doesn't mean you're skimping out per se. Because you're paying an artist $100 to get the same results as somebody else that's charging you $100,000 doesn't negate the quality of that thing. If you're getting as long as you're getting quality results for the money you're spending, I'm fine with it. But if you're just doing it just because you think you're going to get a better return investment, that's my issue. I think a lot of these companies are looking at things from a business standpoint and not the aspect of like Odo's talked about as far as the Going Merry being a character in itself.
Right.
That I understand. I don't think the studios understand that. I think you can recreate the Going Merry and give that same love for it without spending an absurd amount of money on just building an 100% replica from the ground up. Personally.
Right. I got it. I see what I think I understand where you're coming from, and that's fair.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to spend in excess just to spend in excess. Of course not. Yeah, you shouldn't do that. But again, I don't know where I don't know why where the money went necessarily. I mean, let's look at it this way from this one thing. None of these actors, none of the leads in the show for One Piece, right? are big name actors. So the money they spent wasn't on the talent. No offense, but it wasn't towards that. I imagine a lion's share of the budget went towards building these sets, because there's several sets. There's lots of sets, building all the different sets, and getting all the actual crew members, as far as the teamsters and production, whatever it was, to build all these different type of things, light all these different type of things, all the post production, all the pre production, all kind of stuff. That's where a lot of the money probably went.
Because for me, that's unnecessary spending to me personally. That's where you're skipping out on things. If you can spend a little bit of extra money and get an amazing level actor, not even just a big name actor, but just a really good actor to come and play this role, that's where I'm like, all right, cool. I don't mind spending that extra money to have that level of quality versus spending it here when I could be getting it here to get a better product. Personally,
but there's so much that comes into play with that. Like, I mean, along with like building those sets, right? Like part of that, you have to pay the people to actually build those sets. That's part of the budget that goes into it. Like, all the bits and pieces of things to make the lighting the way it's supposed to be. That costs money. Like, there's so many ways to end up spending a large amount of money on a production of that caliber that you might not even account for that. Like, within just like the regular. Like, say if you said like, oh yeah, we're gonna go $10 million, right, to spend on that. Before you even get to the actual process of paying your actors, right? The set design can like I've seen people go into like with my old job, right? I used to work at a job called HMR, where we set up high scale weddings and dinners and events for things. I've seen people go into a project with an intention of spending $800,000 on a wedding, and ended up spending well over $2 million, and it has nothing to do with the actual materials that they wanted. There are fees that you have to pay for zoning. You have to get permits for filming things. You have to get you have to. Like, if you're building a set to a certain degree, you have to use a specific set of workers to do it, depending on where you're doing it at. Like, there's just so many small fees that can come out of nowhere. And like the thing is, like, you say that like they were overspending for doing $16 million an episode. There are still scenes within that still look cheap to me. So like, how can you say that they're overspending if they aren't even maximizing what we want from what they've done?
So let me clarify. It's not just overspending in just the form of overspending. I think it's overspending in certain areas. So like to your point, like the wedding, right, where you're spending all that money than initially planned for, but the end goal and the overall thing that you're trying to accomplish with that wedding is for the family to have a wedding and then enjoy the wedding in that environment. If that was done, you spent that money, you got your money's worth. You got what you were trying to accomplish. To me, that's not overspending personally to me, because that's something sentimental. You're trying to get something. You're not getting a return investment on that. You're spending money just to spend money in that form. With something like this, a better example to me would be like if you're going into filming something, right, and like you've heard a lot where like Sam Jackson, right, in the Marvel stuff, where I think the original comic writer, he drew like Nick Fury in that way based off of Sam Jackson specifically, because he was a fan of him, and that's who he said he would like to see that character as. So if I'm going into a budget, I'm like, hey, I'd like to have these particular set of actors. Let's try to build a budget around getting these people in, but building a budget around the rest of the stuff. If you can build that budget around it and it works, cool. That's perfect. That's the ideal scenario. But if you're spending a little bit of extra money, but you're also getting the level of quality that you were seeking out, to me, that's not overspending. To me, it's more unnecessary spending is what I call. That's probably the better word for it. Like if you're spending unnecessary money.
I think one thing we have to all be aware of is we are not on the set of this. We were not involved in the production of this. So everything we're saying now is so much over speculation that we have no right to attest to, not even a little bit. So the best thing we can do now is simply just judge what we saw on the screen for what it is. Not worry. We spend a lot of time talking about the budget of these things and saying we spent over money. It's like, we don't know where the money went. We don't know what happened. All I know is that some of this was affected because of the actual pandemic. That could affect things, affected the budget too. So I think this conversation, we don't have nearly enough insight to be able to speak on it knowledgeably or accurately.
Well, some parts of it I don't think require a lot of insight if it's blatant in your face, like in regards to like the costume design, or like even like because we had the same conversation with the Marvel stuff, with the MCU shows, as far as COVID interfering with literally like script parts. Like we had with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they had to cut out a whole subplot of a script because of COVID, and they just had to make that work there. It is what it is. Sometimes you have that stuff,
I'm
and that's
saying
part
though
of
is
it.
we don't know where they spent the money. If you have a problem with the costume design or what have you, that's fine. But that may not be where the money is spent. We don't know. So to try to speak about that too much in detail with an overabundance of or lack of knowledge isn't doing anybody any good. It's just speculation, and we're just spinning our wheels.
But that's what we're here for. We're here for pure speculation. We're commenting on what we're observing. That's the whole point of this.
So
thing in
if that's the
general,
case, though, what I would say is you can obviously speak on your problems with the show or shows. That's perfectly fine. But getting so deep into the minutia of the we spent a lot of time, like half an hour talking about the budget of things. We don't even why does that matter to us? Who cares about the budget? Two, we don't really know where the money is being spent. What it matters it's who cares? Who cares? I mean,
we don't know because we're looking at the issues of these things and why we think a lot of these live action adaptations don't do well. A lot of it is how it looks. Like 90% of the time when you're talking about issues, it's how it's looked, and sometimes it's just not them respecting the thing at all because you'll have people calling ang ung or how they pronounce certain things like you just didn't care in that point. But a lot of the issues when it gets how it looks. Like looking at the last Airbender and them earthbending versus looking at them bending a pebble, like that's a lot of the issues with a lot of these live action adaptations because you're taking something crazy in animation and you're trying to bring this over. If you know you don't have the budget or you don't have the ability to make this thing look good, just don't do it because you know you're going to lose that investment, or at least restructure how you're going to do that thing. Because inevitability,
so
like they look
goes into that, bro. Because like you might go in with the full intention of like, hey, I'm going to film this shot exactly this way, and it's going to look like this, and then you do it, and it was like, oh, that didn't go as expected. Now I have to spend money to redo the shot, get whatever new equipment in, get whatever changes. Like, there's so much that can go into like just filming one scene that we can't account for on our end. It's difficult to say like, oh, this was wasteful because like you. Like prime example in the One Piece show, there's a scene where there's a ship battle between the Going Merry and Garp. Like they're attacking them. Like if that scene goes wrong, they may have to rebuild a portion of the set to make sure that scene goes right again, and that might be another $50 million. Not exactly $50 million, but
it could be.
There's so much things that can go into that. Trying to speculate, say like, oh, you spent money on this when you should have spent money on that, when we don't know exactly what that dollar goes into, is like it's like throwing darts at a board. Essentially, there's no way to
we just don't know
things of that nature. I completely understand that because I do understand the aspect of luck when it comes to making stuff like this. Because, like, for example, you hear the story with like the Dark Knight with the Joker walking off and blowing up the hospital. You've heard the whole thing of like his reaction to that wasn't how it was supposed to be written because it didn't go as planned. But because his take and he did it in character and did it so well, they probably saved a lot of fucking money having to re-blow up an entire hospital. So you have luck involved in different things of that nature. I'm just talking about the visible things you can control when it comes to the aesthetics of like, again, I'm harping on costume design mostly. When it comes to like that kind of stuff,
I mean,
I'm not that mad at that. But it's mostly
that might have been the ass end of the budget. They said like, hey, build all this stuff, get all the equipment for these shots, get all the CGI stuff you need, and whatever's left is going into making the outfit design. You know what I'm saying?
But I think also his battery's getting low. Sorry, like I said, we probably cut it.
I didn't charge it up all the way.
Yeah, probably cut the episode here in a bit, anyways. But all I'll say is, it's an aesthetic choice. There's no denying that on some level is probably what Oda and them were going for. They probably were going like, hey, we want this to look kind of like a stage play. This is meant to be. If you've seen One Piece, it is a very like it has some blood and graphic stuff in there and some death and everything else, but it's meant to be kind of an over the top, exaggerated kind of series. So they may say, you know what, this aesthetic fits. These clothes looking the way they do kind of fits for the aesthetic of the show. The color scheme, it fits with it may be. You may not like it. I get that entirely. But it may fit for what you're going for. Oda's mentioned something, or you told me, actually, Charlie, you told me something that Oda said to you before, as far as like Rurouni Kenshin or other samurai anime. Like if they made a Vagabond series, for example, that could probably be an easier thing to adapt in some level because you're basically doing a feudal Japan type of series. And we have a reference for feudal Japan. We know what those clothes look like on some level. We can easily put those clothes in that aesthetic can translate pretty well to modern day, or it can translate pretty well on film because we've seen it before. But something like this, where it was meant to be, it was designed to be an over-the-top animated series. It's a different breed, you know.
Fair enough. And again, for people that are watching this, I am not opposed to being wrong in any way. So if you have receipts or something of the sort that proves me completely wrong, let us know in the comments or on any of the socials. I'll do a whole public apology if I'm just dead wrong on something and they spent money in the right places and it just didn't go right. I'm not opposed to being wrong. This is just my observation from not only this live action, but a lot of the complaints we've seen from every other live action adaptation. Like, there's a reason whenever somebody like an alert about a live action adaptation comes out, niggas are like, "Who asked for this?" That's like one of the number one things I see, or why. And again, those, at least for me and my observation, are the issues that I see recreated from live action adaptation to live action adaptation. But hey, it is what it is. I think we've probably run out of time. We need to get up out of here. But before we get up out of here, you guys have any closing thoughts or sentiments before we get up out of here?
Make sure you check out the review that we did for this episode on the Blurred Cartel YouTube channel, 3-episode rule. Also Talking with the Moon with Ebony Moonbeam. We did a review for the episode as well. So check out the full review there. I gave this One Piece live action 6 out of 10.
Rating
the scores dropping.
Yeah, the rate. The rating. I only watched it once. My rating for it, I would give it a solid 8 out of 10. I'm not the biggest hardcore One Piece fan, but I would give it a solid 8 out of 10. I enjoyed watching it. It was a surprise. It was better than I thought it would be. I liked the fact that it actually had a diverse cast and eclectic cast. I thought the cast is when it comes to portraying these larger than life personalities in live action. I thought that they did the best they could. I thought Luffy, casting a live action Luffy, having him whatever his personality would be, could have been a real nightmare. But for what it's worth, I thought he did the best he could. I thought that it is what it is. So I give it. It wasn't painful to watch this. I would never watch Last Airbender again. I would punch a man in the face if I had to watch Dragon Ball Z Evolution again. I tried to watch some of Cowboy Bebop again. That didn't happen. I could watch this again. So that should tell you something.
Yeah, still best live action ever. It's a 6 out of 10 when it's compared to other series in general. Compared to other live actions, it's like a 35 out of 2.
It's not even close.
Yeah, I'm not going to give it a ranking just for the fact I didn't finish it. I came down with my sickness, I think like 4 episodes in, and I just slept for like a whole day or 2 before this. So I will say it wasn't painful to watch, but it really wasn't like, it didn't make me want to watch it. I was more so watching it because it felt like my job because of the podcast. I'm like, I know I got to talk about this. Let me watch this. But it wasn't terrible. Again, it wasn't terrible. There were just aspects of it that I was like, okay, this is doing the same mistakes that we've seen in other live action adaptations, from my perspective at least. But
there's one thing I want to say real quick, just to say the last thing I would say. When I was watching Asuka episode 1, I noticed that I was time traveling. Like I'd be watching it, and all of a sudden I wake up like, wait, what happened? Because I actually dozed off at points because it got a little too dry, too boring. I didn't doze off watching One Piece.
That's because you're old, though.
Ooh,
I am.
All the criticisms that I give towards Ahsoka, I still got that better than One Piece by a bit of a margin.
I think that's the thing. I think Ahsoka is a better overall show, but I do think its pacing,
the tone,
its
yeah,
pacing
is
is
dinging to spite me right now. He's dinging to spite me right now.
That's both of them have their problems. Both of them have their problems, and both of them have their strengths. They both have their strengths.
I need y'all to say this in the chat before we get online. This is my first time hearing this criticism of the show at all. I ain't hear none of this in the chat. I think it's lagging a little bit. But yeah, before we get up out of here again, thank you guys for tuning in. Check out our other shows and people we're affiliated with, like Blurred, the Blurred Cartel, Tappin' No Cappin', and all the different shows that are associated with those organizations. Those guys make dope content by us, for us. So again, if you are a Black nerd or just an ally, please do us a favor and check that stuff out. We have more stuff to come on the In and Out podcast. We're gonna hopefully have a lot of full slate when it comes to October and a lot of the Halloween content we're planning on doing. We're gonna be reviewing a lot of the new interesting horror films that are going to come out around that time. A24 being one of them, dropping some good stuff. And we're going to have Danny back on the show. So we're going to have our residential special effects expert come back to speak on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
too.
we'll
So
have her talk about budgets.
We'll have some set design, budgets.
Yeah,
she probably has more info than we do
a
on
lot
this
of insight. Yeah.
Granted, it's in horror. In horror, you can do a lot of stuff on a budget, but I digress. Thank you guys for tuning in. We appreciate your support. We hope for your continued support, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Definitely go check out both of these. They're probably significantly better than the Nun 2 is going to be.